8th degree. Intendant of the building. The lodge. Its decorations, etc. The hangings of this lodge are crimson. It is lighted by 27 lights, arranged in 3 groups, of 9 each, and each group forming a triple triangle. These are in front of the east, west and south. In front of the master, to the right, is a small table, on which are 5 other lights, 4 forming a square, with 1 taller one in the center. Over the presiding officer hangs a 9-pointed star, in the center of which is the word. Officers and titles. The lodge regularly consists, and is always supposed to consist, of 5 members only, representing the 5 persons who are appointed superintendents of the building, in the place, for the time being, of the deceased Master Curran. The master sits in the east, is styled Most Skillful Chief Intendant, and represents Adoniram Ben Abada, President of the Intendants. The other members are the wardens, styled First and Second Directors, who sit in the west, and the expert and assistant expert, styled First and Second Inspectors, who sit in the north. O represents Joabut, a phonician, chief of the artificers in bronze. O represents Stokin, a Hebrew, chief of the carpenters. H represents Zilek, of Jabal, chief of the stonemasons. And S represents Garib, the Hebrew, chief of the workers in silver and gold, and engravers. During a reception the master represents King Solomon, the senior warden, Zedek, the high priest, and the junior warden, Aishar, mayordomo, or governor of the house. The expert acts as master of ceremonies, and represents Zabud ben Nathan. Decorations, jewels, etc. The cordon of the degree is a broad watered scarlet ribbon, worn from right to left, at the end of which hangs the jewel, attached by a green ribbon. The jewel is a delta of gold, on one side of which is engraved or enameled 2 words. The apron is white, lined with scarlet and bordered with green. In the center of it is painted or embroidered a 9-pointed star, in the center of which is a letter, and over that a balance. On the flap is a triangle, with 1 letter. The age of an intendant of the building is that of a fellow craft, multiplied by that of an apprentice. The labors commence at daybreak, and end at the 12th hour of the day. To open. Junior Deacon. Garib, the Hebrew, whom I represent, was the chief of the workers in silver and gold, and principal engraver, after the death of the Master Curran. As he furnished designs to the workmen under him, so it is my duty to furnish good examples to the brethren, by the practice of those virtues that adorn the character of a Mason. Senior Deacon. Zilek, the Giblamites, whom I represent, was the chief of the stonemasons. As he saw to it that the foundations and walls of the temple were built strong and solid, so it is my duty to inculcate those manly virtues which give strength and solidity to the character of a Mason, and which alone can make the order perpetual. Junior Warden. Stokin, whom I represent, was the chief of the carpenters, and rose to the highest honors. It is my duty to inculcate and practice the sobriety, temperance, punctuality and industry that make labor honorable. Senior Warden. Joabut, the Phoenician, whom I represent, was the chief of the artificers in bronze, and completed the great works commenced by the Master Curran. It is my duty to imitate these illustrious men in their deeds of usefulness and charity, and of devotion to Masonry. Venerable Master. And it is my duty, representing Adoniram, the son of Abada, to superintend and approve the work of the lodge, to encourage the timid, to repress the forward, and to reward the worthy. The chief employment of an intendant of the building is to carry onward the great Masonic works of charity and benevolence, to found schools for the children of the poor, hospitals for the sick, and houses of refuge for the unfortunate. Reception. Junior Warden. The lamented Master Curran was fond of the society of the young who were eager to learn, and delighted to communicate to them the arts and sciences which he had studied in the East and in Egypt. His chief favorites were Adoniram ben Abada, Joabut, the noble Phoenician, Stokin of the tribe of Benjamin, Zilek, the Phoenician from Jabal, and Garib of the tribe of Naphtali, to whom he taught all the learning that he had gathered from the sacred books of the Egyptian priests and of the Magi of Persia. He often spoke to me of these, his scholars, saying that when he was dead, they would be able to take his place. He often entrusted to Adoniram the superintendence of the whole work, and he made Joabut the chief artificer in bronze. Stokin, chief of the workers in wood, Zelek, chief of the stonemasons, and Garib, chief of the workers in silver and gold, and the engravers. They were greatly trusted by our deceased master, and he believed them fitted to succeed him. They may at least conduct the work until one can be found qualified in all respects to be appointed Grand Master Architect. They will partially supply the great loss we have sustained, if they can do no more. Master of Ceremonies. Such are the lessons of the preceding degrees. To become an intendant of the building, it is required that, besides being skillful artificers and learned in the knowledge of India, Media, Chaldea and Egypt, you should be charitable and benevolent, that you may sympathize with the laboring man, relieve his necessities, see to his comfort and that of his family, and smooth for him and those who depend upon him the rugged pathway of life. 1. Thou shalt not oppress a hired servant or a laboring man that is poor and needy. On the day when he earns it, thou shalt give him his hire, nor shall the sun go down upon it. For he is poor, and it is his life, lest he cry against thee unto the Lord, and God punish thee for this sin. 2. If thy brother be waxen poor and fallen into decay with thee, then thou shalt relieve him, though he be a stranger or a transient person, that he may live with thee. 3. If there be among you a poor man, and one unable to work, of thy brethren within any of thy gates, thou shalt not harden thy heart, nor shut thine hand from thy poorer brother. 4. When thou cuttest down thy harvest in the field, thou shalt not wholly reap the corners of thy field, nor gather the gleanings of thy harvest. They shall be for the stranger, the fatherless and the widow. 5. If thy brother be waxen poor and be compelled to serve thee, thou shalt not rule over him with rigor, but shalt fear thy God. Secrecy. Performance of duties. Benevolence and charity. Venerable Master, I accept and declare you intendants of the building and chief workers upon the Masonic Temple. As successors of our revered Master, strive to follow his excellent precepts and to imitate his illustrious example, and see that you do not prove unfaithful to the trust confided to you, or dishonor the rank and title which you now receive. Venerable Master, I invest you with the apron of this degree. Let its 3 colors, white, red and green, teach you to imitate that purity of morals and zeal for the service of Masonry which have made the memory of our deceased Master immortal in the recollections of men. I invest you also with the collar and jewel of the degree. You do not need to be told of what the triangle is an emblem. When you wear them, remember that you do so as the successor of the Master Cordon, and be careful that you do no act inconsistent with the character which as such it becomes you to maintain. Charge. You have represented one of the 5 artificers appointed by King Solomon to conduct the work upon the temple, for the time being, in the stead of the Master Cordon, who had been murdered, and you have been taught the important lesson, that none are entitled to advance in the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite who have not by study and application made themselves familiar with Masonic learning and jurisprudence. The degrees of this Rite are not for those who are content with the mere work and ceremonies, and do not care to explore the mines of wisdom that lie buried beneath the surface. You still advance toward the light, toward that star, blazing in the distance, which is an emblem of the divine truth, given by God to the first men, and preserved amid all the vicissitudes of ages in the traditions and teachings of Masonry, in all the sanctuaries of initiation in the world. How far you will advance depends upon yourself alone. Here, as everywhere in the world, darkness struggles with light, and clouds and shadows intervene between you and the truth. When you shall have become imbued with the morality of Masonry, with which you are, and for some time will be, exclusively occupied, when you shall have learned to practice all the virtues which it inculcates, when they have become familiar to you as your household gods, then you will be prepared to receive its lofty philosophical instruction, and to scale the heights upon whose summit light and truth sit enthroned. Step by step, men must advance toward perfection, and each Masonic degree is meant to be one of those steps. What if the number is infinite? Each of our few is a development of a particular duty, and in the present you are taught charity and benevolence, to be an example of virtue, to correct your own faults, and to endeavor to correct those of your brethren. Lecture. To go upon a brother's errand or to his relief, even barefoot and upon flinty ground. To remember him in your supplications to the deity. To clasp him to your heart, and protect him against malice and evil speaking. To uphold him when about to stumble and fall. and to give him prudent, honest and friendly counsel, our duties plainly written upon the pages of God's great code of law, and first among the ordinances of Masonry. The first sign of the degree is expressive of the diffidence and humility with which we inquire into the nature and attributes of the deity. The second, of the profound awe and reverence with which we contemplate his glories. And the third, of the sorrow with which we reflect upon our insufficient observance of our duties, and our imperfect compliance with his statutes. Masonry utters no impracticable and extravagant precepts, certain, because they are so, to be disregarded. It asks of its initiates nothing that it is not possible and even easy for them to perform. Its teachings are eminently practical, and its statutes can be obeyed by every just, upright and honest man, no matter what his faith or creed. Its object is to attain the greatest practical good, without seeking to make men perfect. It does not meddle with the domain of religion, nor inquire into the mysteries of regeneration. It teaches those truths that are written by the finger of God upon the heart of man, those views of duty which have been wrought out by the meditations of the studious, confirmed by the allegiance of the good and wise, and stamped as sterling by the response they find in every uncorrupted mind. It does not dogmatize, nor vainly imagine dogmatic certainty to be attainable. A Mason's contentedness must by no means be a mere contented selfishness, like his who, comfortable himself, is indifferent to the discomfort of others. There will always be in this world wrongs to forgive, suffering to alleviate, sorrow asking for sympathy, necessities and destitution to relieve, and ample occasion for the exercise of active charity and beneficence. And he who sits unconcerned amidst it all, perhaps enjoying his own comforts and luxuries the more, by contrasting them with the hungry and ragged destitution and shivering misery of his fellows, is not contented, but selfish and unfeeling. It is the saddest of all sights upon this earth, that of a man lazy and luxurious, or hard and penurious, to whom want appeals in vain, and suffering cries in an unknown tongue. The man whose hasty anger hurries him into violence and crime is not half so unworthy to live. He is the faithless steward that embezzles what God has given him in trust for the impoverished and suffering among his brethren. The true Mason must be and must have the right to be content with himself. And he can be so only when he lives not for himself alone, but for others also, who need his assistance and have a claim upon his sympathy. Charity is the great channel, it has been well said, through which God passes all his mercy upon mankind. For we receive absolution of our sins in proportion to our forgiving our brother. This is the rule of our hopes and the measure of our desire in this world. And on the day of death and judgment, the great sentence upon mankind shall be transacted according to our alms, which is the other part of charity. God himself is love, and every degree of charity that dwells in us is the participation of the divine nature. These principles Masonry reduces to practice. By them it expects you to be hereafter guided and governed. It especially inculcates them upon him who employs the labor of others, forbidding him to discharge them, when to want employment is to starve, or to contract for the labor of man or woman at so low a price that by overexertion they must sell him their blood and life at the same time with the labor of their hands. These degrees are also intended to teach more than morals. The symbols and ceremonies of Masonry have more than one meaning. They rather conceal than disclose the truth. They hint it only, at least, and their varied meanings are only to be discovered by reflection and study. Truth is not only symbolized by light, but as the ray of light is separable into rays of different colors, so is truth separable into kinds. It is the province of Masonry to teach all truths, not moral truth alone, but political and philosophical, and even religious truth, so far as concerns the great and essential principles of each. The Sphinx was a symbol. To whom has it disclosed its inmost meaning? Who knows the symbolic meaning of the pyramids? You will hereafter learn who are the chief foes of human liberty, symbolized by the assassins of the Master Cordon, and in their fate you may see foreshadowed that which we earnestly hope will hereafter overtake those enemies of humanity, against whom Masonry has struggled so long. To close. Venerable Master, go forth into the world, my brethren, and be charitable and benevolent, that you may be content.